My name is Amelia Vance. I am 29 years old. Before we get into the heavy stuff, before I tell you how everything flipped upside down on a random Thursday in November, I want to ask you a question. Grab your coffee, settle in, and really think about this. Have you ever realized that your actual role in your own family wasn't daughter or sister? Have you ever woken up to the cold, quiet truth that you were just an unpaid employee to the people who share your blood? If you've ever spent your entire life trying to earn your place at a table that was built on your own back, type the word boundaries in the comments below. Let me know where you're watching from, because I really think we need to talk about this. It was Thanksgiving Day. The sky was a flat, heavy sheet of steel gray, and the air was the kind of sharp, bitter cold that bites right into your chest the second you take a breath. I live in a quiet suburb just 20 minutes away from my parents' house. That drive used to feel like a straight line to safety, a routine path I had traveled 1,000 times before. As I pulled my car up to the curb, the thick, rich smell of roasted turkey hit me before I even reached the lower porch steps. It was the exact smell of home, or at least the version of home I had spent nearly 3 decades desperately protecting in my own head. I was holding my famous pecan pie in my hands. The aluminum tin was warm and heavy against my bare, frozen palms. I didn't care about the biting wind because mentally, I was already inside. I was completely ready for the familiar wall of noise, the tight holiday hugs, and the usual chaotic energy that defines a big family gathering. I walked up the concrete path, stepped onto the porch, and rang the doorbell. In my mind, I expected the heavy oak door to swing wide open immediately. I expected my mother to pull me into the warm hallway, take the pie from my hands, and complain with a dramatic sigh that I was 10 minutes late. But the door didn't open, not really. It only cracked open a few tight inches, stopped by the heavy metal security chain on the inside. My parents stood there together in the narrow gap. They blocked the view of the warm hallway like 2 stoic security guards, protecting a high-profile vault. There were no welcoming smiles on their faces. There was no happy Thanksgiving. My father looked me right in the eye, and his voice was completely cold, empty, and steady. He didn't even blink as he said the words, "You're not invited, Amelia. Go home." I froze. My brain completely short-circuited. I literally couldn't process the words coming out of his mouth. It felt like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water directly into my face. And then, through the narrow crack in the door, I heard it. Bright, booming laughter came spilling out from the dining room, followed by the cheerful, musical clinking of expensive wine glasses. A party was happening in full swing right behind them. Everyone was there. And then, cutting through the background noise, I heard a specific loud laugh that I knew better than my own. It was Noah, my best friend since kindergarten. He was in there too. They were all in there celebrating together in the warmth, eating, drinking, and sharing jokes. And they had purposely left me standing out alone in the freezing cold. Let's pause for a second, because that rejection at the front door didn't just happen out of nowhere. It was the final devastating crash of a structure that had been rotting from the inside out for decades. But to really understand why I didn't drop my pie, scream, or throw a brick through their window right then and there, you have to understand exactly who I was to them. You have to understand how a child gets conditioned to accept the crumbs of love. If you've ever been labeled the responsible one or the strong one in your family, you already know that it sounds like a massive compliment. But let's be entirely honest with each other over this coffee. In a toxic family system, responsible isn't a trait, it's a job description. It means you are the designated lightning rod for everyone else's total chaos. My parents were deeply chaotic, impulsive people. They were terrible with money, intensely emotional, and completely incapable of planning for the next day, let alone the next year. And then there was my younger sister, Sarah. Sarah was the absolute wild child, the eternal professional victim, the one who constantly needed attention, got into financial trouble, and practically demanded to be saved from her own ridiculous decisions. And me? I was the safety net. I was the family buffer. I remember when I was just 12 years old. I missed my middle school art showcase, an event I had spent months preparing paintings for, because I was sitting at our cluttered kitchen table under a dim bulb, manually balancing my mother's severely overdrawn checkbook with a plastic calculator. She was sobbing on the couch, completely overwhelmed by her own financial negligence, and a 12-year-old had to play the parent. 10 years later, when I was 22 and fresh out of college, I used my very first corporate bonus check, money I had earned working 80 hours a week at a grueling entry-level job, to pay for a brand new boiler for my parents' house because theirs had completely broken down in the dead of winter. I handed the check over, and they didn't even say thank you. They didn't take me out to dinner or look at me with pride. My father just sighed, rubbed his face, and said, "Oh, thank God it was freezing in here." At the time, I genuinely thought this was what love looked like. I thought that being exceptionally useful was the mandatory rent I had to pay just to have a square inch of space in that family tree. I foolishly believed that if I worked hard enough, if I solved enough of their problems, if I gave enough of my own flesh and blood, they would eventually love me just as much as they loved Sarah. Sarah, who never lifted a single finger to help anyone. Sarah, who actively stole money directly out of my mother's purse, but was instantly forgiven because she was just going through a difficult phase. I was the exact person they called at 2 a.m. "Amelia, the house alarm is going off and we can't remember the code. How do we reset it?" Or, "Amelia, can you proofread this aggressive email for me?" Or, "Amelia, we're short on the mortgage again this month. Can you please loan us $500? And I always said yes. My entire identity was wrapped up in being the reliable one, the strong one, the fixer. Noah was the only person who ever called it out. Noah, my lifelong anchor, the guy who used to sit on the hood of his beat-up car with me on warm summer nights. He had looked at me once, years ago, and said darkly, "They use you, Mel. You know that, right? They treat you like a corporate employee, not a daughter. They need a bank account and a maid, not a child." I remember passionately defending them, telling him, "That's just how they are. They need me." That is why Noah's presence behind that locked door was the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't just a bystander. He was the primary witness to my entire life of suffering. He had held my hand when I wept in his passenger seat because my father completely forgot my college graduation ceremony. He had been angry for me when no one else was. And now, he was inside, sharing a laugh with the people who were systematically draining me. The rejection at the front door didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the final crash, but looking back, the cracks had been forming for weeks. I just didn't want to see them. I chose to be completely blind. It started in early November. The leaves were changing into brittle shades of brown, and usually, this was the exact time my mother and I started planning our Thanksgiving menu. Like I said, Thanksgiving was our absolute Super Bowl. We would spend hours on the phone debating stuffing recipes, arguing over herbs, or deciding whether to do a ham alongside the turkey. But this year, the phone stayed completely silent. When I called her, her voice was incredibly short and sharp with me. "I'm busy, Amelia," she snapped before I could even say hello. "I can't talk right now. Your father needs me." "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice light, breezy, and cooperative. "I just wanted to ask about the holidays guest list. Should I make 3 pies or 4 this year?" "We'll talk later," she snapped, and then the line went completely dead. I sat there staring at my phone screen. My mother was never too busy to talk about food. It was quite literally the one single thing we bonded over. I forced myself to rationalize it. I told myself she was just stressed out, that my dad's back was acting up again, or that Sarah was causing some new, exhausting round of drama with her on-again, off-again boyfriend. I told myself I was just being overly sensitive. But then came the physical distance. A week later, I went over to their house to drop off some heavy winter coats I had personally taken to the dry cleaners for my dad. I used my key. I always had a key. I unlocked the front door and walked right into the hallway, shouting, "Delivery service." The entire house instantly went dead silent. I walked into the living room, and my parents and Sarah were all sitting closely together on the couch. They had been talking in hushed, excited whispers, and Sarah was laughing, holding her phone up for them to see. But the exact second my foot stepped onto the carpet, they stopped. It wasn't a natural pause in a conversation. It was a hard, terrified freeze. Sarah immediately flipped her phone face down on the wooden coffee table. The sharp, plastic slap of the phone case against the wood echoed through the quiet room. My mother quickly smoothed her skirt, looking everywhere but at my face, while my father cleared his throat loudly and uncomfortably. "Amelia," my dad said, his voice tight, "we didn't know you were coming over." "I texted you," I said, slowly holding up the heavy plastic bags of dry cleaning. "I brought your coats." "Right. Just put them in the hall," he said quickly, dismissively. He didn't say thank you. He didn't ask me to sit down, and he didn't offer me a glass of water. I stood there for a long, agonizing moment, feeling like an absolute stranger in the house I grew up in. "Is everything okay?" I asked, looking between the three of them. "You guys seemed like you were having fun before I walked in." "Just family stuff," Sarah said quickly, her voice sharp. She refused to meet my eyes. "Nothing you'd be interested in." "I'm family," I said, trying to force a light chuckle to break the tension, trying to turn it into a joke. Nobody laughed, not a single soul. "We're just tired, Amelia," my mom said, finally standing up from the couch. She walked over, snatched the coats from my hands, and effectively ushered me right back toward the front door. "It's been a long week. You should go home and get some rest." I was being kicked out of my own parents' house, under the guise of polite concern. I walked back to my car with a heavy, nauseating knot forming in the pit of my stomach. Something was deeply wrong. And for the next 10 days, that silence only grew heavier. It wasn't just an empty absence of sound. It was a thick, pregnant, conspiratorial silence. The last straw before the holiday was a brief, accidental interaction with Sarah at a local gas station. She was filling her tank and couldn't escape when I pulled up next to her pump. "Hey," I said, forcing a warm smile as I stepped out of my car. "I haven't heard from anyone. Is the plan still 2 p.m. for dinner this Thursday?" Sarah looked completely panicked. She wouldn't meet my eyes, focusing intensely on the plastic gas nozzle instead. Yeah, I think so. Mom is handling it." "You know how she gets," she muttered. "Is Noah coming?" I asked casually. Sarah visibly flinched. It was a tiny telltale movement, a sharp twitch of her shoulder, but I saw it clear as day. "I don't know, Amelia. I have to go," she whispered. She violently ripped the nozzle out of her car before the tank was even full, jumped into the driver's seat, and sped out of the station. I stood there in the freezing air, engulfed in the smell of gasoline, watching her red taillights disappear into the dark. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I decided to drive over to my parents' house one last time, completely unannounced. I had bought a massive, heavy bag of potatoes for the holiday dinner, and I didn't want to struggle with carrying them alongside the pies on Thursday morning. But when I pulled into the concrete driveway, the first thing I noticed was a car I didn't recognize at all. It was a sleek, pristine black sedan, parked proudly right next to my dad's dented old pickup truck. I walked up to the front porch, but when I turned the doorknob, it was locked. I quietly used my keys, stepped inside, and realized the house was completely empty. I figured the car must belong to a wealthy friend of Sarah's, or maybe a neighbor who needed extra parking space. I walked straight into the kitchen to set the heavy bag of potatoes down on the counter, and that's when I saw it. My mother's iPad was sitting right there on the kitchen island. The leather cover was folded back, and the screen was fully lit up. Now, I want to make one thing clear to you. I am not a snoop. I have always deeply respected people's privacy. But the kitchen was dim, the screen was incredibly bright, and a brand new notification banner dropped down from the top of the glass right as I looked at it. It was a text message from my Aunt Linda. The preview read, "Don't worry, he has no idea. This is going to be perfect." My heart instantly started to hammer violently against my ribs. He? Did she mean my dad? Was my family actually planning a massive surprise party for my father's retirement? And that's why everyone had been acting so incredibly strange and distant? Curiosity completely got the better of me. I reached out and touched the glass screen. My mother could never remember a password to save her life, so I had physically configured this iPad to bypass the security lock with a simple swipe upward years ago. I opened the messaging app, and my breath hitched completely in my throat. The text thread wasn't just a private conversation with Aunt Linda. It was a massive group chat containing nearly my entire extended family, and the title of the group chat, written in bold text at the top of the screen, was Thanksgiving 2, No Drama. I slowly scrolled upward, my entire body going completely numb. I saw a picture uploaded to the chat. It was a photograph of the physical holiday guest list, beautifully handwritten on my mother's custom floral stationery. I pinched the screen to zoom in. Mom, Dad, Sarah, Aunt Linda, Uncle Bob, the Millers, Noah. I scanned the page over and over again, but my name was nowhere to be found. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck, and my index finger began to tremble violently against the glass as I kept scrolling through the logs. Mom, I'm just worried she's going to show up anyway. Amelia is so incredibly pushy. Sarah, she won't. I was super weird with her at the gas station today. She honestly just thinks we're busy. Uncle Bob, did Noah talk to her about the plan yet? We need to make absolutely sure she doesn't crash the dinner. And then a text message popped up from Noah's number. Noah, I haven't answered a single one of her phone calls in 2 weeks. She has absolutely no clue. Don't worry, everyone, I'm handling it. I stared at Noah's name on the screen until my eyes burned. I stared at those words. I'm handling it. He wasn't just ignoring me because he was busy with his logistics company. He was actively participating in the coordination of my exclusion. He was acting as their designated gatekeeper, tracking my movements to ensure I didn't interrupt their perfect, warm family holiday. But the message that completely broke my spirit came directly from my own father. Dad, let's just enjoy one single holiday without her. She's been way too much lately, always acting like a total martyr. I just want a peaceful dinner without her constantly keeping score. A martyr. Keeping score. Is that honestly what they called it? Is that what they labeled nearly 20 years of me cleaning up their financial disasters, paying for their winter heat, driving them to endless medical appointments, and sacrificing my own youth so they could survive? I dropped the iPad back onto the polished kitchen counter, and the sharp clatter sounded exactly like a gunshot echoing through the quiet house. I felt physically sick, a wave of intense nausea washing over me so heavily that I had to lean against the island just to keep my balance. They weren't just excluding me from a holiday dinner. They were actively mocking me, strategizing against me like I was a hostile enemy combatant or a disease they desperately needed to quarantine. And Noah, my safe place, was leading the charge. I slowly backed out of the kitchen. I didn't leave the potatoes on the counter. I grabbed the heavy bag and took it right back to my car, because a petty, visceral instinct told me that I couldn't leave them a single ounce of my labor. I drove home in a complete frozen daze, sat down on my living room couch in my coat, and stared blankly at the wall for 3 continuous hours. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep. I just replayed every single favor, every loan, and every sacrifice I had ever made for them. They don't love me, I realized with terrifying clarity. They tolerate me when I am a useful resource, but right now, they just want to enjoy the fruits of my cash flow without the uncomfortable reminder of who actually pays the bills. But the betrayal wasn't finished yet. The emotional knife was already buried deep in my spine, but the next morning would twist it until the bone broke. On Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, I woke up with a brutal headache that felt like a tightening metal vise behind my eyes. I had barely slept a single wink. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a mug of black coffee, trying to decide my next move. Should I call my mother and scream? Should I text Noah and demand to know how he slept at night? To distract myself, I walked down to the lobby to check my mailbox, something I hadn't done in days because I had been so busy baking expensive pies for people who secretly despised me. Buried beneath the grocery flyers was a crisp, official envelope from a financial institution I had absolutely no relationship with, First City Credit. It looked like typical pre-approved junk mail at first glance, but a bold stamp on the front caught my eye. Urgent. We're regging your overdue balance. I frowned, tearing the envelope open right there at the table. I am meticulous with my finances. I have zero personal debt, and I pay off every single credit card balance in full every month to maintain a flawless 800 credit score. The letter read, Dear Ms. Amelia Vance, this is a final notice regarding the outstanding balance of $12,450 on your Platinum Visa ending in 4490. Your minimum payment is now 90 days past due. My hands started to shake so violently that the paper rattled in the quiet room. $12,000. I slammed my coffee mug down, grabbed my laptop, and frantically logged into a comprehensive credit monitoring portal I hadn't checked in over a year. I waited for the dashboard to load, my heart pounding so loudly in my ears it felt like a drumbeat. When the screen finally flashed white, my jaw dropped. My perfect 800 score had completely tanked to a dismal 620. I clicked on the tab labeled Open Accounts, and a nightmare spilled across the screen. First City Credit Visa, opened 8 months ago, balance $12,450. Lakeside Auto Loans, opened 6 months ago, balance $28,000. Quick Cash Personal Loan, opened 3 months ago, balance $5,000. I literally couldn't breathe. Someone had entirely stolen my identity. I clicked into the specific details of the First City credit card to look at the registered billing address, and there it was, spelled out in clear, digital font. 14 Maple Drive, my parents' house. The auto loan was for a brand new Explorer. 6 months ago, my father had proudly driven a brand new black Ford Explorer into my driveway, bragging that he had come into some extra cash from an old investment. He had taken me for a celebratory ride in it. He had bought that car using my social security number and my pristine credit history because his own finances were too ruined to qualify for a loan. And the $5,000 personal loan? It perfectly matched the exact dates of my mother's girls' trip to the coast. They weren't just tired of my martyr act. They were actively stealing from me, destroying my financial future while smiling directly to my face. And the absolute worst part was that they assumed I would never check, or that if I did, good, reliable Amelia would just quietly pay it off to protect the family from ruin. The grief I felt from reading those group chat text messages evaporated into the crisp morning air. The deep sadness was completely gone, replaced by something cold, hard, and unyielding. It felt like steel forming in my chest. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a victim of a coordinated, systemic fraud. But as I sat at my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, a heavy realization washed over me. I couldn't just stop at my parents. If I was going to pull the thread on this entire sweater, I had to look at Noah. You don't get that close to a family of grifters without participating in the scheme, or at the very least, utilizing the chaos to your own advantage. Noah ran a small import-export logistics company. 2 years ago, he had come to my apartment, practically begging on his knees for my help. He needed a commercial surety bond, a high-level insurance guarantee, to land a massive city development contract, but his business credit was completely in the gutter. Mine was immaculate. I remember him looking at me with desperate eyes and saying, "It's just a signature, Mel. If I don't get this, my business goes under. I swear you'll never have to pay a single dime." And because I was the family fixer, because my default setting was to save everyone around me, I signed the documents. Because I was the legal guarantor on that surety bond, I had full, unrestricted legal access to his corporate business portal. I had never once looked at it because I trusted him with my life. But trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. I logged into the state's business registry, entered my guarantor credentials, and watched the corporate financial dashboard load. At first glance, everything looked perfectly normal. Revenue was steady, and operational expenses were standard. But then, my eyes caught a recurring monthly payment to a vendor called Lumina Logistics. Every single month, Noah's firm was paying them exactly $4,500 for project management consulting fees. I knew Noah's business inside and out, and he didn't use outside consultants. I opened a new tab, hopped onto the state registry, and searched the business filing history for Lumina Logistics. When the PDF loaded, my breath caught completely in my throat. The registered owner of Lumina Logistics was listed as Sarah Vance, my sister, and the primary business address? 14 Maple Drive, my parents' house. Noah wasn't paying a legitimate consultant. He was actively funneling thousands of dollars directly to my sister. Why? I dug deeper, pulling up the digital transit manifests and the secondary contracts Noah had signed. That's when the horrifying picture finally came together. Noah had taken a lucrative, under-the-table contract with a local construction firm known for cutting environmental corners. The contract was for the disposal of hazardous industrial waste. But Noah's logistics company didn't hold a waste disposal license, nor was he certified to handle toxic materials. He was illegally dumping construction waste into uncertified rural areas to save massive amounts of money, and he was paying my sister $4,500 a month in hush money to keep the operation entirely in the family. If he got caught, the state fines would be astronomical. And because I was the sole guarantor on his commercial surety bond, the state would legally come after me to pay every single cent of those fines. He was risking my literal freedom and my financial ruin to buy my sister's silence and my parents' affection. He was their financial cash cow, and I was the unsuspecting insurance policy protecting them all from the law. I sat back in my chair, the dim room illuminated only by the cold blue glow of my laptop screen. The final tear I would ever shed for these people slid down my cheek, and I wiped it away with an angry, firm swipe of my hand. I spent the rest of Wednesday gathering every single scrap of evidence. I printed the credit reports, the forged auto loan signatures, the First City credit statements, the illegal waste manifests, and the surety bond agreements. I built 2 flawless physical manila folders, one for my parents and one for Noah. I drafted a massive, comprehensive email to a contact named Karen at the state licensing board, attaching every single piece of corporate fraud evidence I had uncovered. The subject line read, "Violation of bond agreement and unlicensed hazardous activity. Priority." I didn't press send yet, and I didn't call the police fraud department just yet. I wanted to give them one final, absolute chance to prove me wrong. I wanted to see if the door would actually open on Thursday, if they would welcome me in, if they would apologize, or if they would tell me the truth. But if they treated me like the virus they described in that group chat, I was completely prepared to pull the pin on the grenade and burn their entire world down to the ground. Which brings us right back to where we started. Thursday afternoon, standing on that dirty, bristly doormat, looking at my father through a 3-inch crack in the oak door. "You're not invited, Amelia. Go home. We'll call you next week when you've calmed down," my father said, his voice entirely devoid of any warmth or familial love. I looked past his shoulder one last time and saw Noah. He caught my eye, took a slow sip of his expensive wine, and casually turned his back to the door, completely abandoning me. That was the absolute final piece of evidence I needed. My conscience was entirely clear. "Okay," I said softly. My father blinked, visibly confused because he had expected me to cry, beg, or start a massive screaming match on the porch. "Okay, happy Thanksgiving." I calmly set my homemade pies down right there on the dirty mat, turned around, and walked back to my car at a perfectly normal, unhurried pace. I could feel their eyes boring into my back from the living room window, probably laughing nervously and congratulating themselves on how incredibly easy it had been to get rid of me. I got into the driver's seat of my car, the interior freezing cold. I didn't drive away yet. I wanted to be right here to watch the first domino fall. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to the financial fraud department at First City Credit. "This is Amelia Vance," I said, my voice sounding completely calm, steady, and detached. "I am calling to formally confirm the fraudulent charges on my credit profile. Yes, I want to file the official police report immediately. The primary perpetrators are currently residing at 14 Maple Drive. Yes, I am fully willing to press charges and pursue maximum prosecution." I hung up, opened my email app, pulled up the comprehensive draft to Karen at the state licensing board, and firmly pressed send. Finally, I opened a blank text message, typed in Noah's number, and sent one last message. "I just legally revoked your commercial surety bond." I also forwarded the complete financial records of your illegal waste manifests and the Lumina Logistics kickbacks to the state board. Good luck surviving the audit. I set my phone down on the dashboard and rolled my window down just a tiny crack to listen. Barely 5 minutes passed before the peaceful, warm glow of that house completely shattered. The front door flew wide open, and my mother came sprinting out onto the porch, clutching her chest and holding her phone to her ear. "Amelia!" she shrieked into the freezing air. It wasn't a welcoming cry. It was a screech of pure, unadulterated panic. "Pick up the phone right now. The credit cards are entirely frozen. The grocery accounts aren't working." Right behind her, my father came storming down the porch steps in his bare socks, his face turning an angry, violent shade of crimson. "Amelia!" he bellowed, waving his arms wildly. "What the hell did you do?" "The local police department just called my cell phone. They said there is a criminal warrant pending for my arrest. Fix this right now." Then, my dashboard lit up with an incoming call from Noah. I answered it, leaning back against my headrest. "Mel, what did you do?" Noah was weeping openly, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form words. "I just got an official emergency email from the state licensing board. They are suspending my logistics operations immediately. They are launching a full criminal investigation, Mel. They are talking about actual prison time for the illegal waste dumping. Why would you do this to me?" I took a slow, deep breath, letting the silence stretch between us for a moment before I delivered the coldest line of my entire life. "I'm just handling it, Noah," I whispered. "What?" he choked out. "You explicitly told my family in the group chat that you were handling me," I said, my voice razor sharp. "So, I decided to handle you. You are operating an illegal business as of 5 minutes ago, and the state knows everything." "Mel, please," he sobbed. "This completely ruins me. This destroys my entire life." "You ruined me first," I said firmly. "You stole my credit, you stole my trust, and you actively helped steal my family. Enjoy your turkey, Noah. I hear federal prison food is incredibly bland, so you should really savor this final meal." I hung up the phone, put my car into reverse, and locked the doors just as my father lunged forward, violently banging his fists against my passenger window. "You ungrateful brat," he screamed, his face pressed against the glass. "After everything we ever did for you, you're going to send your own father to jail over money?" "It's not about the money, Dad," I whispered to myself, staring at him through the glass. "It's about my life." I backed out of the driveway, shifted into drive, and left them behind in the dust. I drove exactly 2 miles down the road, pulled over into a convenience store parking lot, popped the SIM card out of my phone, and snapped the plastic cleanly in half. I tossed the broken pieces into a public trash can, drove onto the highway, and never looked back. The next few weeks were a blur of absolute cold efficiency. I didn't go back to my apartment except to pack my clothes. Instead, I stayed in a quiet hotel 2 towns over, paying for everything in cash so I couldn't be tracked. I hired a brilliant shark-like defense attorney and handed him my entire physical manila folder. When he looked over the documents, he sighed and said, "Amelia, they're your parents. Are you entirely sure you want to press criminal charges? Usually, families try to settle these kinds of financial disputes privately." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "They aren't my family. They are a group of calculated identity thieves who stole $45,000 from me and tried to ruin my reputation. Treat them like absolute strangers. Because I had provided an airtight mountain of evidence, the police didn't have to do any digging. The legal fallout was swift, brutal, and devastatingly precise. My father was arrested for felony fraud and forgery, and my mother was legally named as an accomplice. Noah's logistics company was shut down by the state within 48 hours, and the Environmental Protection Agency stepped in regarding the illegal toxic waste dumping. The structural fines were astronomical. Noah lost his house, his commercial assets, and his trucks. He ended up facing 3 years in a minimum security facility. They tried to reach me, flooding my email inbox with pathetic, pleading subject lines like, "We're sorry, we were desperate. How can you do this to your own blood?" I didn't read a single one. I simply forwarded them to my lawyer to add to the harassment and restraining order file. I broke my lease, sold every single piece of furniture I owned, packed my life into the back of my real car, the one I actually paid for with my own honest labor, and transferred my corporate job 1,000 miles away to Denver, Colorado. I wanted mountains, crisp air, and a clean slate where absolutely nobody knew my last name. When I set up my mail forwarding at the post office, I didn't even use my new home address. I forwarded everything to a generic P.O. box in a completely different state, which then routed documents directly to my lawyer's office. I chose to become a total ghost. I remember driving out of my hometown on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I drove past the grocery store where I used to buy their food, past the school where I used to pick up my sister, and past the park where Noah and I used to sit. I felt a strange, phantom pain in my chest, like an amputated limb. I realized I didn't miss the reality of them. I just missed the beautiful fantasy version of them that I had spent my entire life trying to build in my own head. But as the city limits sign faded away entirely in my rearview mirror, something incredible happened. My shoulders dropped. The heavy tension in my jaw completely released, and the chronic headache that had been lingering behind my eyes for a decade vanished. I turned on the radio, sang along, and realized that while I was entirely alone with no safety net, I also had no debt that wasn't mine, no secrets keeping me awake, and no one waiting around for me to fail. I was completely vanishing from their lives, but for the first time in 29 years, I was finally appearing in my own. Now, 5 years later, the mountains in Denver are absolutely breathtaking in November. They are dusted with sharp white snow against a bright blue sky. I have a small, cozy house of my own. The deed has exactly one name written on it, mine. I have a rescue dog named Buster who doesn't manipulate me or demand financial favors. He just wants belly rubs and food. He is honestly the most loyal male I have ever known. It is Thanksgiving morning. My kitchen smells incredible, filled with the rich, warm scent of rosemary, garlic, and fresh basil. I am not baking a turkey today. To be completely honest with you, I never even liked turkey. I only used to force myself to make it because my father demanded it. Instead, I am making a massive, multi-layered, homemade lasagna from scratch with rich meat sauce and 3 kinds of cheese. It is my absolute favorite food on earth. There is zero chaos in my home. There is no screaming, no frantic phone calls, and no massive pile of heavy coats blocking my hallway. At 4 o'clock, my friends are coming over. These aren't family members who are biologically obligated to sit in a room with me. These are chosen friends. People I met at the local dog park, colleagues from my project management firm, and a neighbor who teaches pottery down the street. They know me simply as Amelia the hiker, Amelia the project manager, and Amelia who makes the best lasagna in the neighborhood. They don't know me as a victim, and they don't know me as a family doormat. I told them the absolute basics. I am completely estranged from my biological family. Because they love and respect me, they never pried. I pour myself a crisp glass of wine and look out the window at the falling snow. I know exactly what happened to them because my lawyer provides a brief, clinical update once a year. My father received probation and community service, but his financial credit is entirely ruined forever. They lost the beautiful house on Maple Drive and are forced to live in a cramped, tiny apartment now. Sarah's works long shifts at a local diner, and Noah moved away to another state the second he got out of jail, working basic construction labor with absolutely no management privileges. And the best part? They are still actively paying me back. Every single month, a court-ordered restitution check for exactly $150 arrives at my lawyer's office. At this current rate, they will be sending me those checks until they are nearly 90 years old. I don't need their money. The second the funds clear, I donate every single dime to a local charity that helps victims of severe financial abuse. But those monthly checks serve as a beautiful, quiet reminder. I won. And I didn't win by screaming louder than them, playing their toxic games, or lowering myself to their level. I won by completely refusing to play their game ever again. Suddenly, I hear a car pull up outside, and Buster barks happily, his tail wagging. My friends are finally here. I walk over to the front door, and I don't hesitate. I don't look through the peephole with anxiety or fear that a monster from my past is standing on the porch. I swing the oak door wide open. "Come on in," I say with a warm, genuine smile. "Happy Thanksgiving." The cold winter air rushes into the hallway, but it doesn't chill me for a single second. The house is completely warm. The laughter that fills the room as people step inside is authentic, light, and real. I look at the beautiful dining table set perfectly for 6 people. I look at the wine glasses catching the soft afternoon light, and in my mind, I think back to that broken, exhausted young woman standing on the porch 5 years ago, holding those pies, begging for a single scrap of love from a family that was actively trying to starve her spirit. She feels like a complete stranger to me now, a sad, tired, distant stranger. I lift my wine glass and raise a silent toast to her memory. "You did it," I tell her in the quiet spaces of my mind. "You walked away, and that was the absolute greatest plot twist of all." They truly thought I was absolutely nothing without them. But it turned out I was everything without them.